So hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us on this, our second Indie List Learn Over Lunch session. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Herlihy. I am one of the co-founders of the Indie List, and together with my co-conspirator and fellow founder, Peter McPartlin, we're delighted to have so many of you joining us here today, listening into our pre-webinar chit-chat. Peter and I are going to be doing a lot more of these sessions over the coming months, and in fact we have another 2 sessions lined up for later on this month and in mid-April. But as always, we'd love to hear any suggestions from you guys on the types of topics and experts you'd be interested in hearing from, so don't be shy, as if. So today we are joined by 2 people who spent most of their careers in the freelance world, and they've both been extremely supportive and encouraging of us as we've been building out the Indie List. John Ashton is an author, change maker, which is very cool, and founder of Right Arm, a multi-skilled content and copywriting agency. He also leads the online kitchen table community, which promotes the creation of sustainable lifestyle businesses using a freelance-based agency model. So John, we're very happy to have you here today to join in this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Good. We also have our very special guest dialing in from Miami, our guest speaker, Matthew Mottola, who despite his fresh face and young appearance, has achieved so much and has so much experience in many aspects of the freelance model, all of which he has documented in his new book, The Human Cloud, which we're reading at the moment and is fantastic. So Matthew, you're very, very welcome. And thank you both for volunteering to do this session for our fantastic Indie List community.
Thanks for having us. We're all pumped up.
Yeah,
I wish there was a pint. I feel like in pure Irish fashion, I should have a pint, but
yeah, exactly. It's a bit early.
We'll make do.
So in fairness, it's probably only 8 o'clock in the evening. But look, just before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. So if I can ask you all to kind of go on mute and switch off your video feeds, the attendees rather than the panelists. If for whatever reason you get cut off from the session, just click back on the link again and we'll let you in. So we're recording this session, guys, so you can watch it back at a later date. And this session is largely going to be Q&A, so we want to make it as interactive as possible. So please use the chat box, ask loads of questions, and we will endeavor to get to them. Finally, we have 10 copies of Matthew's book, The Human Cloud, to give away at the end of this session, and it's great reading, and they're going to be given out to people who we think, like we're trying to come up with a really creative mechanic for this giveaway. So we've decided we're going to give it to the people who ask the best questions, or at the very least, the people who give us lots of compliments. Okay, so that is it. We're going to get on with the show. So look, Matthew, first of all, before we talk about the human cloud and the insights that led you to writing this book, can you kind of talk to us about, what is it that brought you into freelancing? And it seems like it's a way of life for you. So talk to us about the various stages of your journey over the last few years.
Yeah, so I like to say all I know is freelancing. The reason I say that is because I started and then I tried the corporate thing and realized, holy crap, there's no way things are going to look like this, nor should they. But so I started freelancing in college. It was the first purely to make money. I couldn't do it in a full-time role, so I would do more of the management consulting. I would go business to business. I would say, how can I help? I can do some competitive analysis, do some budgeting, and then that would turn into these freelance contracts. But to be honest, I didn't call it freelancing, nor did I know it was freelancing. I thought I was pretty immature. And then so I kind of, quote unquote, grew up, made it to one of the big fours, and it was horrible. And I just remember thinking like, oh my God, this immature thing I was doing was funner, for lack of better words. I had more autonomy. I was doing much better work. How come this thing that I was supposed to be looking forward to really, really, quite frankly, sucks? And so that was my foray into, oh my God, freelancing is just a new way of working that to me made much more sense. It opened up opportunities for me. I could do it wherever I was. I made great relationships from it. So that was sort of my intro. The second thing though was, all right, now that I've been a freelancer, how do I really drive impact? Because I think one of the things that we all think about, especially I like that you pointed out, the idea of a change maker is just someone who drives massive, massive positive impact. And I was young. And so I was like, well, I don't really know much and I don't really have much money. But fortunately, because I was a freelancer, I understood the model and I went right to hiring freelancers. So I would go into a client and I would be more than just a researcher. I would turn into basically an outsourced COO. And so I would create their social media department. I would create their research department. I would create their accounting department. And I would create it all by using freelancers. And so then that sort of jumped me into this, oh, wow, we can create massive outcomes at scale, leveraging fellow freelancers, meaning hiring fellow freelancers. And then the massive, massive problem in terms of what I was doing the past 3 years was I was then helping large companies, because a lot of times freelancing was happening more in this solopreneur, startup-y environment. But for the past 3 to 5 years, large companies have wanted to jump into freelancers, but there was massive, massive problems. And so that's what sort of led me to Microsoft, where we're building a technology stack in between freelance platforms and the companies. The reason for that was these companies, they want to spend over $100 million on us, but there's massive security, there's massive compliance, there's massive integration, and there's massive change management issues, which we'll get into sort of the impact of this. But yeah, that's sort of been my brief, lot of scars, a lot of pain, but no, it's been a blast.
Cool. And I mean, look, just before we go into the human cloud, as someone who has been freelancing for the last 15 years, I've always felt a little bit maybe like yourself that the term freelance didn't really kind of sit right with me, certainly the work that I was doing. And I felt that sometimes it kind of carried a little bit of negative baggage. So when you started writing about change makers, I mean, I just felt this was so empowering. And you know, we've always said at the indie list that, you know, freelancing isn't for everyone. You have to have a certain type of mindset to make it in that world. So can you explain what you mean by change maker and what sort of characteristics do you all share?
Yeah, so in terms of change maker, it's funny. At first I thought that was just a bunch of rebellious young people that were pissed off and didn't want to just go get a job. And what I mean by that is, you know, many people in my generation and younger, we kind of crave change, and we look at a job not just as somewhere we show up and sort of follow a checklist, but instead somewhere that we want to make a massive impact. Now, through the book, what I realized, and sort of even through my career as I go, is that it's not just young people. In fact, everyone can be a change maker. The only difference is, do you want to make a massive positive impact? That's it. And there's change makers that are directors, there's change makers that are VPs. I think, I don't know if large company CEOs necessarily are change makers. That's still, the jury's out on that one. But no, all a change maker is someone that wants to make a massive, massive impact. And when you look at the impact of freelancing, this is why we intentionally cut it up into 3 areas. We don't say the world is going to be all freelancers. We say that, and we can think of different words, but I like independent, to be honest, independent creative, something around there. But so what we say is, listen, there's 3 ways to engage with the freelance economy. You can be a freelancer, you can hire freelancers, you can build a business around freelancers. Choose. And it's not also a binary decision. It's also something that's hybrid. So myself, I've been a freelancer, I hire freelancers, I've been a full-time employee. The only difference is that it's all about making a massive, massive positive impact.
Wow, yeah, okay, that's right. I love that. And, you know, like, I think both myself and Peter have come from that world as well, where we've worked in companies, we've worked freelance, and now we're creating a business with the Indie List, which is, you know, purely around facilitating this. I mean, John, you know, in both you and myself and Peter are extremely proud to be named change makers in Matthew's book. I mean, we couldn't believe it, quite frankly, Matthew, when that happened. But I mean, John, I'm sure you recognize yourself in how Matthew has described it, and hopefully you do.
I wish I did. You know, I mean, Matthew's so strategic in the way that he looks at things. And to be honest, I bumbled into this. You know, I set up my writing agency right on because I didn't have the budget to hire people and hire offices. You know, I didn't really have a clue what I was doing. I just learned along the way. And similarly, you know, the new thing I've set up, the kitchen table community, which is you know, it's a virtual community for small agencies and people who would like, you know, freelancers who want to make the leap into having a small agency. Didn't really have a template for that. You know, I just kind of, I've always just sort of gone on and done things, but you know, along the way you realize that, you know, you're actually, you know, perhaps onto something here. And the, you know, the reception for both businesses has been very good. And I think, as with the Indie List, you know, you've kind of hit the zeitgeist, not just because of the pandemic, but because people, you know, the technology has enabled remote working freelance work in a way that it never did before. Previously, as a freelancer, you were just, you go into companies like a member of staff, you just wouldn't have the perks. Now it's very different. Now you can work from home. You can base your working life around your personal priorities.
Yeah.
And that's very empowering. It's empowering for you because it changes the way you think about work. But it's actually good for your clients too, because when you do that, you do better work. There's a very simple equation at the heart of all this, which is that people do the best work when they're happiest. And if they can build their working life around their personal priorities, and work might be the top priority for them. It certainly was for me for a large part of my career. But if you do that, you're just naturally happy and you do better work. So it's just good for everybody. And that's the really revolutionary thing about the growth of the freelance economy. And the pandemic has supercharged all this, but it was happening anyway, and it was happening rapidly.
Yeah, we see it actually a lot like in a lot of people in our community are really sort of motivated by having work fit into their life rather than the other way around. And I think that's kind of why a lot of people have maybe just turned their back a little bit on the corporate world. They want to contribute to the corporate world for sure, but they just don't want to cope with the crap that's associated with that, which of course, Matthew, you've just kind of alluded to. So Matthew, talk to us about the human cloud. What is it?
It's a massive buzzword. It's the least of all the buzzwords, I hope. No, there's so many that we throw. Like we freelance economy in itself is a massive buzzword. We talk about gig economy. We talk about open talent. We talk about on-demand talent, sharing economy. There's so many of these things. And I think what the quote in the book is like, I feel like a curmudgeon that just wants to yell like, everyone shut the F up because you're making it more confusing. When we say the human cloud, all we mean is the fact that we can do what we're doing in a digital and remote way. That's it, in the end of the day. And COVID has shown us that over 90% of work can happen in a remote fashion. So when we talk about what is the human cloud, I think the most important thing is it's that first term, actually. It's the fact that it's human. And so it's not this buzzwordy sort of researchy thing where we talk about sharing economy, Uber, gig economy, and getting rid of humans. No. It's the opposite. It's how do we put humans at the center and have really, really efficient models so that we can do our best work. And if you look at the freelance, if you look at the freelance economy, why this even exists, there has to be a massive change in some way for any technological change, right? And so for freelancing, it's better, it's faster, and I hate this buzzword, but it's cheaper. And so the reason for that, and as freelancers, you actually make more generally than you did in a full-time office. But so the human cloud is simply a more efficient way to organize work. And the impact is that both for the client and for you as a freelancer, you're better, you're faster, and we'll call it you're more cost efficient.
Yeah, well, that's kind of really interesting because, I'm working my way through the book at the moment on Audible when I go out for my walks and also on print. But what I find really fascinating is the way in which it challenges some of the written in stone conventional pieces of wisdom. Like, for example, this idea when a company is looking to engage with a vendor or a supplier, they can choose two of the trinity of quality, cost, and speed. So are you saying that in companies that embrace the human cloud, they can have all three?
For sure. And one massive thing I'll call out, because it's a little bit counterintuitive, is the cost component. So you actually might pay more per hour or per day or even per project for a freelancer. But the difference is that with an agency or full-time, an agency, it might be a 6-month contract. For a freelancer, it might be 6 days. Like there's the cost efficiency. So you still potentially pay more. I generally like to say I usually pay more for the actual freelancer, but we're only working together for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, a couple of months versus these massive contracts.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with the agency model, there's, you're paying for overheads, you're paying for a lot of superfluous things that you don't actually need. And I think the challenge for freelancers is making sure that we're not being compared on a like-for-like basis with agency per hour costs. So if companies can have all three, if that's the case, then what's stopping kind of more and more companies from really going there, really embracing the human cloud?
Yeah, so we'll go with let's go with today, and then we'll talk about the past 2 to 5 years, because I think COVID did not expect, obviously no one expected it, but did not expect the impact I mean, there's things that were happening the past 6 months that I didn't expect to happen for the next 5 years. But so the number one reason that companies didn't adopt, from what I saw, was the fact that they would say, this can't happen outside these four walls. Like, that was the number one thing. The second thing is usually that the client experience in itself is really, really rough. And I very intentionally call it the client experience because I think it's up to us to change that. And so when I say client experience, put yourselves in the shoes of a hiring manager or the person that's going to hire you. First off, most likely, they're not sitting in a hiring role. They're probably a product marketing manager, they're a VP, they're a CMO. Their job description doesn't say you have to hire 100 freelancers this year. So the incentives actually aren't to actually hire them. It's to get stuff done. So COVID, the massive, massive impact is that overnight it shattered the number one hesitation, which was this work can't happen outside these four walls. Now we shift to a little more of the change management, a little more of the client experience. And there's a couple of variables that we just have to, that aren't necessarily a full stop, but we have to be aware of and have to wrap around. So one massive variable is IP, so intellectual property. If you're in a company, a lot of times the freelance program guidelines are you can't have a freelancer work on anything that's considered IP. So then you ask, what's IP? Everything. So then you sort of peel the onion back and you say, all right, well, how can we get a freelancer to get this done? It might be something like you do a PowerPoint for your client, but you take out slide 14 or you take out this specific thing. So that's one of the examples of client experience. A second one is actually the raw tools. And this is something, we all, we solve it every single day with VentureL. But so the huge thing is something like wholesale access. So an employee actually might get fired if they give you access to a file that also has customer data on it. And it might not be they're just emailing you a file. It might be that they added you to a Google Drive folder that has PII, personal identifier information, that has PII in it. And so at first you're like, okay, it's better, it's faster, it's more cost efficient. You have these incredible results. For example, the North American motorcycle manufacturer fundamentally transforming their rider experience. But then you start to peel back and you look inside and you realize, holy crap, there's actually a lot of risk in the way, which if you think about the way a large company is structured, it's usually to mitigate risk. Most large companies, that's in the end of the day, what they're meant to do is to mitigate risk at all costs. And so when you look at our freelancing model, I would say it's just a factor in time. It's not something that we can't go through, but we just have to sort of work one by one on these things. And the number one thing, like I said, that changed is remote. By far was the number one blocker. That's gone. But now we have to worry about the client experience, specifically a bunch of little variables that make it really tough to hire us.
Right, okay. Well, John, would you have any perspective on that from your own experience in recent times?
Well, I think the client experience thing is really important, but I think you can, if you're aware of it, then you can mitigate it. I mean, what I do with my company Writearm, we hire out freelance writers to clients, not as an employment agency, but on a project by project basis. So somebody comes to us and they want a series of articles written, a white paper or whatever. We're very careful in selling ourselves to say, look, it's a pain for you to hire freelancers. We make it easy. We take away all that pain. So if you're running that kind of freelance-based business, or if you're a freelancer yourself, be mindful of the fact that it's a pain for them, and just address that and keep addressing it. And one of the ways to address it, if you're employing freelancers to work with your clients, is that you give them a set of, you tell them your values, you tell them the values that you have as a company and that they need to comply with, and you give them some basic rules. And it's amazing, I didn't used to do this, just used to take it on trust that they'd behave well, and by and large they did, but we had a few instances where they didn't. And fortunately we managed to nip the problems in the bud, but those situations could all become toxic. So write down the rules. It's very simple. This is as old as time that we have our commandments, but it's very basic. And I think that Matthew's obviously addressed this in a much deeper extent, but that's my as someone who hires out freelancers to businesses, that's my perspective on things. You know, you've just got to make that client experience as pleasant as possible, because you're dealing with humans. Actually, you know, at the end of the day, you're dealing with humans. The outputs can be great, but if the day-to-day interactions are not pleasant for that marketing manager, if that's the, you know, the post you're dealing with, then, you know, you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Absolutely, yeah.
And John, if I could add too, I think one thing, you know, a small hack that goes a long way is that, and this is why I fell in love with Right Arm and you know, sort of where the future of freelancing is going, is that the number one fix was usually calling yourself an agency. Like most of the freelancers that would get hired by large companies, they weren't John or Matt or Una. They were generally John Studios or Una Studios. And, you know, there's many reasons for it. The first thing is that perception is reality in a large company. And so usually the person hiring you, one of the massive things that's happening in their brain is, how do I prove this to my boss? And the classic quote is, no one gets fired by hiring Accenture. And so if you're called John Studios, then there is that implicit bias that, okay, they're going to have an insurance policy. They're going to have controls. They're going to have corporate governance. Yeah, it's still just John sitting there in his underwear, sitting in his turtleneck. But that was a major, major hack usually, was that freelancers would, especially to get the door open, were to be considered an agency.
Yeah. I think that's a really good idea. Matt, in your book, you talk about like lots of stories. You know, you've got some great stories of individuals who've like really rocked it from an impact point of view in terms of the work that they've done. Can you talk to us about your favorite stories of individuals? I'm sure you. I'm not
supposed to have favorite children. They don't know this. They think they're all equal. No, so I definitely have my favorite children. That's for sure. One of the number one story that I just love, and the reason is because all these people I sort of know personally, and I can account for, okay, they've done this, they've had consistent results. But so the woman Sam Mason in the book, I just, you know, she is one of the best PMs, one of the best change makers I've ever met in my life. And so I'll give you a little bit about her backstory, and you're going to realize, holy crap, this is someone that I need to hire ASAP, which I, you know, hired her not knowing this stuff. So it was one hell of a surprise. But so her backstory was, she was a software VP. When she had kids, she wanted to go raise her kids. So she left the workforce for a couple of years. When she came back, companies told her, there's no way you're going to be where you used to be because you've been gone for too many years. She turned around and said, screw it. I actually really love the written word. I've always wanted to be an editor. Now's my time to do that. So we met when she was an editor for me about 4 years ago. And I realized that she actually became sort of my right-hand person. Like, she was my mini chief of staff, where she was our editor, but then she also was our project manager. And so she was doing hiring and firing and PMing of fellow freelancers as well. And she also was at the middle of the country. So she was based in Ohio. So that is like one of the change makers that I'm like, yep, okay, there's a clear favorite there. And one of the things that makes me so happy with a lot of our freelancers is I'll email them and be like, hey, do you have availability? And most of them will say, nope, talk to you in 3 to 4 months, or I can be available in 3 to 4 months, something quick. And I'm like, okay, that warms my heart, but shit, now I have to go find another change maker. So that's one of my favorite stories. And related to that, there's 2 things I want to get across. The first is, it's all about becoming the trusted resource. And so when for your client, you are looked at as a superhero. Specifically, you're looked at as a massive resource. It's like a chief of staff in the specific domain that you fit. So if you're marketing, you're not just doing an article. You have to be that one point of contact for marketing, just like how a CEO has a chief of staff. And if you think about it sort of incentive wise, like, think about yourself. If you're a VP, director, whoever it is that's hiring you, you don't have time to go hire 1 million freelancers. You ideally have time to hire one person, and we want to put all of our trust into you. So that's the first thing. Second thing, though, that I want to really get across with these change makers is the power of relationships. This was not just one, quote unquote gig. This was a, hey, let's test each other out. Let's start working together in a very, very cheap and fast way at first, but then let's build a really, really strong relationship, to the point that during the book, we actually did an offsite at her house in Cincinnati. And so I slept in like a guest bedroom. We cooked together. We did like all the team, we did like a mock wedding shoot in a random park. Like, this is so much more than just a quote unquote gig economy where you're doing a transaction and a bunch of articles. This is, for me, it's been deeper than any type of traditional work that I've seen.
I've seen that photograph. She looks like your mother. Looks like you're having a family dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the wedding, funny story about the book, the mock wedding shoot kept getting kicked out of the proofs. And so like it was supposed to be in the first page. It was supposed to be intro, and then here's a mock wedding shoot of my co-author and I behind a tree. It kept getting kicked out. We didn't know why, and they still haven't told us why it's officially kicked out. But it's online somewhere.
It's cheesy. I've seen it.
Yeah.
It's great. Look, what I want to do is maybe just bring in a couple of questions from the group, because we're getting quite a lot of engagement. So Peter, you might tell us some burning questions. Turn on your sound there, Peter. You're on mute.
Mute button. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, just keeping an eye on some of the questions coming through. Ashling has asked a couple of questions, I think one of which has already been answered by Matthew, but you might want to expand on the Matthew. Is how do you get into big companies when you're working solo? As we all know, it's a big challenge for people who are working on their own, and how to make that breakthrough to the next level. And one of the things that you talked about was, calling yourself an agency, which Ashling, I know, has responded to. Anything you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so the first thing you have to do is generally a relationship. The getting the contracts within an agency, or sorry, within a large company, 90% of the time, from what I've seen, come from a relationship where either you know the person that's hiring you, or even better, you have a relationship with the person that got the contract. And so what we always like to say is, if you're a freelancer, it's not just you. You're not an island on your own. The most successful freelancers have a community / a tribe behind them. And so go meet, 15 fellow freelancers right now, 5 have them do the same thing as you, 10 have them do something complementary, because relationships is the #1 way that we've seen projects won. Second thing though, which expands on, it's not just getting in the door, especially with a large company, it's scaling across the organization. And within an agency structure, generally you have an account manager and you have a principal or a partner. That partner takes the client out to dinner, takes them to baseball games, has a private suite, and the account manager keeps them happy so that they keep bringing in business. As a freelancer, you don't have that. You can't go take them out to a baseball game. You can't have a corporate suite. But what you need to do is you need to scale. And so the #1 reason we'd stop working with freelancers is that a project would happen and we'd say, this was incredible. Can you take on X increase, or can you now go work with Xbox or take on more work? And they would say, nope, can't do it. I just do articles. They would lose the whole contract. And so the massive thing through all of this is having a strong tribe and a strong community and relationships with fellow freelancers, because #1, that gets you in the door, but deeper than that, that's what keeps you and have you growing across the accounts versus just losing them.
That's actually
it's something that we picked up quite a bit. John Younger did our first session with us last year, and it's a phrase that he's used and we've used quite a bit, is encouraging freelancers to hunt in packs. So, in a lot of cases, clients are looking for people to do a range of different tasks. And we have a couple of briefs at the moment where we know one individual is not going to be able to accomplish everything within that project. So, clearly clients need to understand that as well. And I think freelancers working together is something that we've tried to encourage since we set up the indie list. Yeah.
And Peter, let me add to that too, because there's one thing that makes you look like a rock star that you can probably do today. So when a client asks if you can do something and the answer is no, don't say no. Say, I'm not the best person to do that. Let me connect you with who is. And even if someone else does the work, we don't care. We look at you as the rock star because you're the one that sourced that. And even if you don't project manage it, even if you're just the one sending the email intro, we still look at you as a rock star. So if there's a project that comes in and you can't do it, don't say no. Say, let me get you to someone who can do it better.
If I can chip in there, I think there's there's 3 levels to freelancing. It's like it's stages of evolution, if you like. At the bottom end, you've got the standard freelancer, which I was one, and you do the work, you take the money, that's it. That's how you think of yourself, as an independent worker. Next up, you've got the professional freelancer. We call it professional freelancer, and you think of your career as a business. So you get strategic. You put aside money for to outsource the services that you don't have time, you shouldn't be doing yourself, like bookkeeping, etc. this is all fresh in the mind because I recorded a podcast yesterday with a woman called Sarah Townsend, who's written a very good book called Survival Skills for Freelancers, and she talks about getting strategic, thinking of your freelance career as a business rather than just as something you do. And then the third level is what Matthew's talking about, which is the network freelancer, and that's the stage at which you begin to think not of yourself and what your little siloed skills that you can provide to a client. You begin to think, well, how can we meet the client need, and how can I do that through my network? And that's why I'm all for freelancers branding themselves as an agency, and maybe doing all the client work themselves initially, but then growing out that agency by offering a further range of skills outside of what they do. I'm not saying become full service. I really don't think that becoming a full service agency is a great idea, but look at my agency, Right Arm. It started off as me as a kind of generalist, but very soon we added these specialist writers who could do what I couldn't. And actually I do no writing now. I've not done for years. I just hire out the right writers and meet the client need that way. So look at yourself and work out what stage in that evolution you are, and I would suggest that you aim to climb up those tiers.
Brilliant.
There's a question from David O'Sullivan, and he's asking about what's more important in choosing a freelancer. Is it talent, or is it the ability to collaborate and work with others? I can answer that. I can say some of the things that we've been saying to clients, but I'll let you guys join in as well. I think you need both. Clearly you have to have the talent, but you also have to be capable of collaborating. The thing that we say, and we've been doing a lot of credentials presentations on behalf of freelancers to clients and agencies, and the thing that we say to them is that you're getting people first and foremost who are capable of doing the work, that are going to challenge you, because if they're not challenging, then they're not really adding value, to your brief, and maybe taking a different perspective than you or your team might. And also that they're commercial, that they're people who are absolutely focused on delivering a commercial output. And finally, that they're collaborative as well, that they have to want to work with you as well as work for you, because they don't. So it's something that we try and get across. As I say, we use it as sort of 4 selling points for freelancers globally, but it's something that we clearly depend on the freelancers to follow up with. Anything to add to that, Matthew?
Yeah, I would say the most underestimated thing, and especially as we go towards a more digital world, meaning, it's algorithmic and it's more about the data tagging than it is going and meeting in a coffee shop, in like a networking event or something like that. The freelance economy is hyper relevant. And so it's more than just a skill. You're not just a writer. You have to have many experiences that are unique to that specific client. And so one example, actually one of the writers in the book was, she was an expert at Leonardo da Vinci. And so we were hiring for a story on Da Vinci. And when we looked at all the writers across the human, we had one who was really good, but also an expert in Da Vinci. And who won? Obviously her. And so it kind of had nothing to do with their communication skills, or even, we weren't looking for 100, we were looking for hyper relevance. And I've seen that in so many different examples. I mean, one of the big ones in a huge software project was, it was a digital service firm, or it was a financial service firm in India looking to increase engagement of their checking accounts. And so we found the perfect person who had experience both in, I think it was experience in casinos, as well as the specific developer in that language. And so it was, there's this hyper relevancy that we see in the freelance economy that is different than if it's staffing or you're going for a full-time job or even agency. And so that's what I would call out, is it's more about hyper relevancy than it is being the best at something. And I would add to that as well, it's also contextual. So what we believe is good is totally subjective. If I would bring a PowerPoint to Microsoft, that same PowerPoint, I'd get laughed out of the building if I was in Silicon Valley. And this actually happened. Like, I remember when I was working at Microsoft, I was with my friends in SF, and I showed them what I was working on. They were all just like, "Oh my God, this is disgusting." And then likewise, if I showed them the same PowerPoint that, brought back to Microsoft, Microsoft would be like, "This is immature, and this is just that startup crap." And so it really all comes down to hyper relevance, where it's not necessarily being the best, it's being the hyper relevant for your client, which, most important, is going to differentiate you when it comes to price, because they can hire any writer in the world. They can hire any PM, any developer, but you are hyper relevant. And it might even just be you went to the same college or your kid went to the same college, but it's really comes down to hyper relevance in my experience.
I agree. I think I wouldn't disagree with anything either of you have said there, Peter and Matthew. What, to sum it up in a line, as well as having having the right skills, I always say you've not got to just do good work, you've got to be good to work with, and that comes back to your soft skills. I think we've got we've got a lot of really good writers, and the ones who've not done well with us are the ones who are just difficult, and there's I got another mantra is the customer is always right even when they're wrong, and if you sort of bear that in mind and take a deep breath when they're pissing you off, then that goes a long way. It really does.
You want to hear a secret? I usually don't tell people this because it's how to get me to say yes to pretty much anything, but so if you bring up my hometown, if you bring up my grad school, or you show me a golden retriever, I'm probably going to say yes to it. And so that goes through all the communication, all of the quality. And this has kind of happened before too. If people have reached out and been like, hey, I'm from I know about your town, or I went to your town. And I'm like, cool, how can I help? I'll do anything. Yeah, there's we all have something unique about us, and it's about highlighting that uniqueness and hyperrelevance.
You heard it here, folks. First,
don't use it against me.
I just want to jump back to the book for a second, because one of the things that really resonated with me was this idea of a sort of a portfolio career. You've called yourself, Matthew, a bit of a Renaissance man, or having professional ADHD, which I can really relate to. But the thing that makes me nervous is having kind of lots of different projects on the go at once, and it makes me feel a little bit like a jack of all trades and a master of none. So, and that's of course rocket fuel for imposter syndrome. So what's your advice for those of us who kind of crave variety and also thrive because of it, but also need to find work and to be known for adding value?
Okay, so what's funny? This is the beauty of why we didn't tell you who was writing the book. That was actually the other Matt. And yeah. So I like to say the better looking and more successful Matt, but that was totally him. The guy can't make up his mind on anything, yet he's, a CTO, has done incredible things. And whereas me, I'm actually a little more of a 1950s, I just stick with one thing. I'm a white picket fence type person, you name it. Yeah, but the sort of moral of that and the insight there is that this, what we're going into, it comes down to outcomes, specifically social proof to the outcomes. So if we were to do a hierarchy of what's really important, at the end of the day, it comes down to outcomes. Can you prove that you can deliver me an outcome that exceeds my expectations? That's really it. Whether it's a full-time employer, whether it's you as a client, you name it. Can you exceed my expectations? Below that, we start to see things like, okay, do you have the social proof? Meaning, do you have reviews? Do you have the actual tangible artifact? Meaning, do you have an example of exactly this? And then do you have the hyper-relevance? Meaning, are you in my industry? Have you worked with someone that I would find credible? You name it. So that would be the massive insight with Matt. And if you look at Matt's, his career cracks me up. He's like an AI, technology whiz, yet he's done so many damn things. But because he's been a master in, AI / that one specific skill, which I think we bring it up in the book, there is two paths. You're the best at one problem, or you're the best at one skill. And that's been something that, I don't want to make it binary, but that's something that we've both noticed that's brought us personal success. Is for me, it's like freelance economy. That's it. One trick pony. I'm good at sales. I'm good at above average at sales and marketing, but I'm really good at the freelance economy. Matt, really good at AI. So he's done a bunch of different, outcomes in a bunch of different spaces, but AI is his niche.
Okay, cool. I don't want to because I know we're coming towards the end, and I want to bring in Peter for some more questions from the community, but I just have maybe a couple of big questions to ask you guys before we move over to Peter, and it's really about how to now scale and control your freelance career. What are the key things that you think the community that are here now today should be focusing on to increase their chances of success? I'll ask you first, Matthew, and then maybe John, you might come in afterwards.
Yeah, so what is the top 3 things to do right now? Yeah. Number 1, go meet fellow freelancers. Can't stress that enough. There's so many different reasons for it, but at a very, very like tangible level, as a client, I need you to have a network. I need you to team up. I need you to be able to refer work back and forth. Second thing, from a selfish reason for you, something I was actually, how do you say, it's a little bit more of the self-help crap, which I really hate, like the self-help industry. But what do they call it? The power of 5, like you are the average of your 5 friends. And so go find freelancers that are better than you and that are, you know, in different ways. That'd be the number 1 thing I would say. I think that everything I've sort of, you know, the way that I've handled my career is you take on way too much responsibility and you find a way to get it done. And then you learn way more than if you had actually planned for it. And so the only thing I really plan for is the relationships that I nurture. Everything else I sort of learn on the fly. And I think if you know, really hone in the relationships, you'll start to learn that you have to be you have to be like John. You have to start to build an agency. You have to have structure. And you'll probably be saying, okay, John, I now have, 5+ projects with 5+ freelancers. What the hell do I do? I also have taxes. What do I do? And he'll be like, okay, this is how you set up your agency. But no, that'd be my number 1 thing. Go out and meet 15 freelancers.
Brilliant. What about you, John?
Yeah, well, it's all about the network. So I'd absolutely agree with that. Work on the relationships. You know, as I said before, be good to work with. Don't just do good work. But also look at your pricing. You know, if you're going to be successful, as I said before, you've got to think of yourself not as a worker, but as a business, right? So you've really got to look at all the things you need to price in. And you've got to price in the stuff that you can't do and you shouldn't be doing. You know, the number 1 is bookkeeping, but there are some other things in there as well. And you might want to price in some marketing, you know, like doing a PPC campaign or something like that. Particularly if you're niche. You know, another thing to say is you should really work on your niche. So if you are a copywriter who excels in working with professional services, shout about that. You know, I always say you've got your shop window and you've got what you sell below the counter. You know, and for my company, Right Arm, the shop window is writing, you know, and within that, a lot of it is tech. We do a lot in tech. However, we've done some other stuff. You know, we've done video once or twice. We've done some pay-per-click. We've done some SEO consultancy, but that's all beneath the counter. That's when the clients say, "Oh, can you do that?" And we say, "Yeah, we can do it. We've got the network." But really concentrate on your niche. And when you are in a niche and you're excelling in that niche, you'll be in greater demand than if you're just putting yourself forward as a generalist. And when you're in greater demand and when you've got that niche, then you can command better prices. You know, so that's what I would say. But really, you know, really look at your pricing and don't be shy about putting your prices up. You'll hate this, you two, because all the people in your community are going to start charging you more. But you know what I mean? It's really important, and it's important. You got to see your own value, and the reason you need to, you know, you need to be looking at increasing your prices is that you know, professional freelancers price in all those things that they shouldn't be doing themselves, and the bumblers like I used to be don't.
Hey John, can we list like 1 to 2 myths that freelancers are given that I think are absolute crap? Because I think that's more important than the "what should you do" question. Yeah. I'll start it off with this whole thing that freelancers have to be thought leaders. I think, for lack of better words, like that is the worst crap I've seen anywhere, because the best freelancers that I know, meaning they have the most job security, you don't know it. It's kind of like if you're rich, you don't tell people. Like the best freelancers that I've seen, they're pretty hard to find, meaning they're not posting LinkedIn statuses every day or having Twitter. Like I mentioned, this is the Sam Mason. If you looked at her stuff, you'd be like, oh, all right. Yet she's going to be employed for the rest of her life because I know that the deep relationship she's formed with her clients, we're all fighting over her. We're all saying, yep, we need a freelancer like that. Yeah. So that's just one thing I really, really, really want to sort of call out that I get worried about with new freelancers. I hear it a lot is, I don't want to be, you know, on Twitter every single day or LinkedIn. You don't have to be. That's just one inbound strategy. Yeah, that's the one I'd throw out there.
Good. Like it.
I'm getting a lot of hate mail about it, but I know.
Peter, do we have any questions?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions that have come in, some of which have been answered along the way. John talked a little bit there. Kate had asked a question about pricing and how to price yourself, and I think John expanded on that a bit to factor in all of those kind of costs that you sometimes forget about. And just maybe to pick up Matthew or what John said, we actually advise people along the way when they ask us about how to price themselves. We don't directly get involved in pricing because ultimately a freelancer has to decide themselves what their value is. But we do advise freelancers when we believe that they're pitching themselves too low. And I know some of the people on the call here, we've had those conversations and said, look, you're actually below what we would regard now as the market rate. So we're definitely encouraging better value around certain types of freelance work. And particularly in those specialist areas,
May I share the best tip I've ever heard about pricing? It's fantastic. If you say I was pricing up a copywriting job, and it was to write a white paper, say, so you could just price it. You put a line in your quote: white paper, £3,000. But then if you go white paper to include research, telephone consultations, production of first draft, amends, feedback, proofreading, then you're giving value, you're showing the value, same price, you could even put it at a higher price, do that. Just break down everything you are giving under that, under the banner of the, the top line deliverable. And it's a you sprinkle magic on your quotes and you get them accepted that way.
Can I add to that, John? So one massive problem that we would face from a client side would be freelancers would be too expensive. And so what I like to say is have a small, medium, large. And small, medium, large does not mean you're underpricing yourself in any way, shape, or form. It means that you're properly scoping your offering. And so your small offering might be $200, but it's it's within your time. Your medium project might be 2,000 to 5,000. Your large might be 15K plus, and it all has the same structure, which John, you just called out, which is beautiful. It's like the roadmap. It's like, this is week 1, this is week 2, this is week 3, this is week 4, and every single offering has a clear outcome. But that's just one huge thing to think about, is that from a client side, we want to test you as cheaply and fastly as possible. And we don't want you to underprice in any way, shape, or form, but it needs to be a very, very clear outcome, which is why Upwork versus Fiverr. Fiverr nailed their their UI. Their user interface is beautiful because it's outcome based. It's just like going to a McDonald's and saying, I'll take the number 2, where Upwork totally sucked because you would have to post something, meaning the client had to do the work. But so I'd add that from a pricing perspective. You can look like a rock star if you have a small to medium, large outcome.
There's a question come up from 2 people, Helen and also Barney, earlier on, but it's on the whole area of the lack of support that somebody working on their own as a freelancer doesn't have versus someone working for a company, and particularly in the area of job security, health insurance, holiday and sick pay, and so on. Any advice that guys could give in those particular areas? Because sometimes, as we all know, freelancers end up being exploited because people, read the free bit and the freelancer bit and think it's going to be cheap as chips. And as a result of that, freelancers maybe haven't factored in all of those additional costs that they need to protect themselves.
Yeah.
You kick it off, John.
You've got to, first and foremost, you've got to target clients who've got the budgets to pay you a decent rate. Speaking, go back to the thing I said before. You've got to price in those securities. You got to price in your pension and all the other things you need, and the auxiliary services that you need to hire in, so you're not working every hour God sends and stressing yourself terribly, and impacting on your well-being. As somebody who hires freelancers, we've got a general principle, which is that we're fair to everyone, and that we don't try and nail people to the floor on cost, and we don't try to wring as much out of clients as we can. and that, you know, that helps us sleep at night. So, you know, if you are going to hire freelancers, you need to put the same things into practice. You know, we've all got to be good to each other, and that sounds sort of wishy-washy, but you know, if that becomes integral to the culture of the freelance economy, instead of, you know, and we can, you know, the awful end of the gig economy is not going to go, but it can be diminished and it can be shamed into improving. And I think, you know, if we're people who are employing freelancers, then we've all got a role to play in that.
Can we kill it, John, please? Like, I know the law of diminishing returns are around 97%. It's stupid to optimize, but can we just kill the gig economy? Like, please just get rid of it. No, so the way I would add to that is, listen, we can go line item by line item about sort of things, right? So like job security from a freelancing perspective, I'd argue you have more job security as a freelancer. You have multiple clients. Things like benefits. Oh, yeah, you're better off as an employee. But I think a lot of these things are, number one, a moment in time, and number two, can be mitigated by being amongst the right communities. So don't just be a freelancer by yourself. Join IndieList, join RightArm, join the various community that's best for you. And the reason is that IndieList and RightArm and you name it, just like, you know, how Google and Facebook and all these companies have leveraging and power there, so does IndieList, so does these different communities. So that'd be the one thing I would throw out would be, yes, in some cases, freelancing is way more risky. You're at way more of a disadvantage, but those things are, this is the right word, mitigatable. And joining a community, joining an organization is a way to mitigate a lot of those uncertainties.
Great. Guys, I think we're going to wrap it up because we're almost at 2 o'clock and time has just whizzed by. I hope that all of you who've tuned into the session picked up some useful, helpful advice along the way. I want to thank John and Matthew for their generosity today and taking time out, and also along the way and being really supportive of us as we're building out this business. We're going to follow up with a summary of the main takeouts, and we'll distribute the recording as well as the names of the lucky winners of Matthew's book. And actually, by the way, folks, if any of you are interested, John has very kindly allowed us to piggyback on a great session that he's got lined up for Friday lunchtime on how to make the most of your presence as a freelancer on LinkedIn. So definitely worth checking in for that. And if you go to the IndieList page on LinkedIn, you'll be able to see a link there to register for it. That's all right, John, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, please do.
Okay, cool. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate everybody tuning in, and thank you for all of your questions. We've got another session coming up in a few weeks that's going to be talking about pricing. So I think a lot of you will be very interested in that. So take care, everybody, and stay safe. Mind yourselves.